Welcome back to the Legacy Radio Network. I am Dennis Tubbergen, your host, and you are listening to the Everything Financial Radio Show. We are here every week at this time, and we're certainly glad you joined us. Joining me today is Professor Laurence Kotlikoff. He has a resume that would take me probably this entire segment to cover. Been a consultant to many world central banks. He's served as an economic advisor to at least a couple of presidential administrations that I'm aware of, and we continue our conversation with him now. Professor, you have talked about the fiscal gap that our country faces, and just in case someone missed your last appearance on the show, could you explain what a fiscal gap is?
Right. Well, the fiscal gap is like a balance sheet for the U.S. It's looking at all the liabilities the U.S. government has. So we're talking here about not just the official debt, but paying all the Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, defense expenditures, all the expenditures going forward for the country. And you look at all those expenditures and you measure those in what's called a present value, form the value in the present of all that future spending. And then you compare that with the value in the present of all the future taxes. Now, the Congressional Budget Office is making projections that we can use to form this fiscal gap, and you find that the difference between the value of all the projected expenditures less all the projected taxes, the shortfall is $222 trillion. That's 20 times the official debt. So what we're doing here is looking at the molehill and not the mountain, or if you like, the tree but not the forest. When we look at the official debt, all the major liabilities our country faces are not being reported on the books because they've been kept off the books because the politicians wanted to make it look like they were being fiscally more prudent than was the case. So you now have something like 10,000 baby boomers retiring, hitting age 62 every day, and many of them are going to get their Social Security, and when they hit 65, they're going to collect their Medicare benefits. So we have these astronomical bills coming due, and they all show up in the fiscal gap. The fiscal gap doesn't miss anything. So we're basically driving in Los Angeles with a map of New York and heading off a cliff. The map of New York is the official debt, which is basically meaningless. It's not a well-defined measure. It's a function of our fiscal labels, or it's our linguistic choices. It's not our underlying fiscal policy that's being recorded. And then we have the true measure, which is the fiscal gap, which incidentally rose $11 trillion just last year. So our country is just incredibly bankrupt. If you think the Republicans, like Paul Ryan, are being fiscally, going overboard, that's a joke. What Paul, who I know quite well, is a friend of mine, is proposing is far too little too late to really fix this problem. The problem is far beyond what Democrats and Republicans understand.
Professor, I was going to talk a little bit of politics, so I'm glad you brought that up. Certainly when you look at the Republicans, they're talking about the fact that Obamacare actually guts Medicare, and then when you look at what the Obama campaign is saying, it's that Paul Ryan is going to, push Graham over the cliff. We're not going to have any Medicare. She's not going to have any health care. Yeah. Who's right?
Well, first of all, I'm a friend of Paul's, but I'm not a supporter of everything he's proposing. Who's right is that both of these guys are wrong. Both of these guys are proposing policies which are not going to work for our country. Both of these folks are politicians who, some of whose policies would help certain things, but they're not quite right. I mean, Obamacare is trying to cover 50 million people who otherwise would have no health insurance. That's extremely important. The president should be applauded for that effort, but the cost of this could be enormous. We need to get everybody covered at an affordable cost. I call that the Purple Health Plan. If your listeners go to thepurpleplans.org, they will see the Purple Financial Plan, which I just spoke about. That's limited purpose banking. They'll see the Purple Tax Plan, the Purple Health Plan, the Purple Social Security Plan, the Purple Energy Plan. These are proposals that nonpartisan economists would favor. I'm not a partisan person. I think economics needs to stay above economics needs to stay above politics. And so what I'm putting forth on this website are proposals that would actually fix these problems. They're tough, radical medicine, but they treat everybody fairly. They don't throw grandma off the train. On the other hand, they don't let grandma expropriate her grandchildren, which is really what we've been seeing for 6 decades now, leaving a $222 trillion fiscal gap, handing that over to our kids and grandchildren. That is definitely the end of the American dream that we have in place. So we have to get control of this situation. We're looking at the wrong numbers. We've got the politicians happily trying to talk about the deficit and the debt when it's the fiscal gap they need to be focused on, and understand that the deficit and the debt are not even well-defined economic concepts from the perspective of economic theory. You can't write down an economic model where the equations of the model define the deficit uniquely. It's all a matter of labeling. So we have in economics exactly the same problem that they have in physics when they talk about time and distance. They're not well-defined measures either, as Einstein pointed out. They depend on your frame of reference, where you're going through, what direction through space you're heading, and at what speed. That's your frame of reference or your language, and that determines how you measure things. Well, our labeling conventions in the economic realm are determining how we, the size of the debt and the deficit we report. So we're literally in a world of the emperor's new clothes. We're talking about numbers that have no connection to reality, to underlying fiscal reality, and you just, look, we've got Social Security Administration is telling us, the trustees report is telling us there's a $20.1 trillion shortfall in present value in Social Security, even counting the trust fund. That's a $20.1 trillion obligation that's not on the books. The fiscal gap in Social Security is $20.1 trillion, and it's not counted. So why is that not counted? Is it somehow easier to renege on those Social Security benefits than it is on official debt? Absolutely not. It's quite the opposite. It's much easier to renege or default either through inflation or explicitly on the Chinese who are holding U.S. Treasury bonds than it is to default on my mom's Social Security check. She's 92. So these implicit, unfunded entitlement obligations are much more real from an economics perspective than the official debt in terms of having to be paid off, and they're not counted on the books.
That's a terrific explanation, and I want to go back and revisit the growth of entitlements, because according to a source that I read this week, that the cost of Medicare has risen over 9% annually from 1980 to today, and Medicaid in some cases this year will grow by up to 20%. That type of growth is simply unsustainable. How do you stop it?
Well, the Purple Health Plan gives everybody under the Purple Health Plan, I get rid of Medicare, Medicaid, employer-based health care, and I just start from scratch. I say, look, the country has a consensus that everybody needs a basic health plan, and let's spend 10% of GDP, which is what the federal government is now spending on health care, federal and state, on this basic plan. And everybody should get a voucher, and the voucher should be adjusted for your pre-existing conditions. So if you've got diabetes, you get a much bigger voucher than if you're perfectly healthy. And we have software that can do these individual risk adjustments for the vouchers. Everybody gets a voucher. You take it to an insurance company, and you say, here's my voucher. The voucher comes from the federal government. Here's my voucher. Give me the basic plan. And the basic plan would be set by a panel of doctors. They would say what the basic plan is, what the basic plan covers, and they would set those coverages so that the cost of all the vouchers doesn't exceed 10% of GDP. Now you've got every insurance company, health insurance company in the country competing on a single commodity, which is the basic plan. It's not like they can put in the fine print, we're going to cover kidneys but not heart failures. No, they would have to provide exactly the same basic plan. That's not part of Paul Ryan's proposal. That's not part of Obamacare. There's all this choice. Well, this choice of different plans is an invitation for insurance companies to take us to the cleaner. What we need to do is have the insurance companies compete in a uniform market to provide a single commodity which we can actually afford. And then how do you pay for these vouchers? Well, we'd use a progressive tax system, and that's where the purple tax plan comes in. That would pay for the health care vouchers as well as everything else the government is spending money on. So there are ways to fix the country. We can't continue to have 535 or so politicians make a mess, and that's what they're doing. So I don't know where this is all going to lead, but it doesn't look good. I mean, the situation, as you said, has been going on for a long time, and it's getting worse. And it's getting worse at leaps and bounds.
But, Professor, we've got a couple minutes left. What is the end game as you see it? We can't keep running $1 to $1.5 trillion deficits. Yet, no matter who gets elected next year, that's what we're looking at, likely at a deficit. When and how does this play out? How does it stop?
I think it stops very, very badly. I think it stops with benefit cuts that people aren't with something that's very similar to what's going on in Greece. A lot of social unrest, benefit. The government's going to have to print. Our government's already printing huge amounts of money, and so this could end with hyperinflation taking off, with people getting royally hurt. Older people, younger people, with younger people leaving the country, with our interest rates shooting up like crazy, with long-term bond rates going nuts and wild, and bond prices collapsing. So the bond market, it's going to. Now, when exactly that's going to happen, I don't know, because people think that Europe is in worse shape than we are. But the fact of the matter is that the U.S. is in worse fiscal shape than any developed country in the world. At this point, we're in worse shape than Greece or Italy or Spain by a long shot, because on the official debt side, we look like we're in better shape. But if you look at these unfunded liabilities, all the other obligations we've got, we're in much worse shape. Not because our demographics are worse, but because we have unrestrained health care spending. So it's not my numbers I'm talking about. It's really the CBOs, and they're the best source for reliable projections on this. And they just put out a projection in June, the alternative fiscal scenario they put out, and it shows a $222 trillion fiscal gap if you add up the numbers. That's, again, $11 trillion bigger than it was last year. That's more than all the official debt we have outstanding in the hands of the public. So in 1 year, the fiscal gap grew by more than all the official debt. That just shows you how meaningless the official debt number is.
Professor Kotlikoff, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. Everything Financial Radio will return after these words. Stay with us.